For decades, the global financial system has been built on a simple, unspoken agreement. A grand bargain struck in the smoke-filled rooms of international finance. China makes things, America buys them, and China takes the mountains of dollars it earns and uses them to buy US Treasury bonds. This is the engine of globalization, a seemingly perfect symbiotic loop. China gets a guaranteed customer for its exports, and the US gets a guaranteed lender to finance its ever-growing deficits. It's a system that has kept US interest rates artificially low, the dollar artificially strong, and the shelves of Walmart perpetually stocked with cheap goods. It has been the bedrock of the global economy for a generation. Until now. Because that engine has just seized, the loop is broken. China has stopped buying, in fact they're selling. Since 2021, China has dumped over $300 billion of its US Treasury holdings. That's a 25% reduction in their portfolio. And they're not alone. Japan, the largest foreign holder of US debt, has also started selling. So has Saudi Arabia. So have dozens of other countries. This is not a coincidence. This is not a market correction. This is a coordinated strategic shift away from the US dollar. And it's the beginning of the end of the dollar's reign as the world's reserve currency. To understand why this is happening and what it means for you, you have to understand the 4 stages of reserve currency collapse. Stage 1 is the exorbitant privilege. This is the stage the US has been in since 1944, when the Bretton Woods Agreement, signed in the mountains of New Hampshire after World War II, made the dollar the world's reserve currency. It means the US can print money to pay its bills, and the rest of the world has to accept it. It means we can run massive trade deficits year after year, decade after decade, without consequence. We can consume more than we produce, and the rest of the world will foot the bill. It means we can fund our government with borrowed money, and other countries are forced to lend it to us because they need dollars to trade with each other. It's the ultimate financial superpower. It's like having a credit card with no limit, and no one ever asks you to pay it back. Stage 2 is the signs of weakness. This is the stage the US entered in the 2000s. The national debt, which had been relatively stable for decades, began to explode. Persistent trade deficits became a permanent feature of the economy. The manufacturing base, the backbone of American prosperity, was hollowed out, as jobs were shipped overseas in search of cheaper labor. And a series of financial crises, from the dot-com bust to the great financial crisis of 2008, required massive money printing to solve. The world started to notice that the US was not as fiscally responsible as it used to be, but there was no alternative to the dollar. The euro was a mess, the yen was stagnant, the yuan was not yet ready for prime time, so the system held, but the cracks were beginning to show. Stage 3 is the crisis of confidence. This is the stage we are in now, and it was triggered by a single event, the freezing of Russia's central bank assets in 2022. When the US and its allies seized $300 billion of Russia's foreign currency reserves, it sent a shockwave through the global financial system. It was a message to every country in the world. If you defy the United States, your dollars are not safe. Suddenly, the dollar was no longer a neutral asset. It was a political weapon. And that changed everything. Countries like China, Russia, and Saudi Arabia realized that their US Treasury holdings were not assets. They were liabilities. They were hostages to US foreign policy. So they started selling, and they started building alternatives. China's cross-border interbank payment system, or CIPS, a rival to the US-controlled SWIFT payment network. Russia's system for transfer of financial messages, or SPFS. India's growing network of bilateral trade agreements in rupees. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, have created their own new development bank, a rival to the US-dominated World Bank and IMF. And most importantly, central banks around the world are accumulating gold at the fastest pace in 50 years. This is the infrastructure of a post-dollar world being built in real time. It's a parallel financial system designed to operate outside the reach of the United States. Stage 4 is the collapse. This is the final stage. It's when the crisis of confidence becomes a full-blown panic. It's when foreign countries don't just stop buying US debt, they start dumping it. All at once, when that happens, US interest rates will skyrocket. The value of the dollar will plummet, inflation will soar, and the US government will be unable to fund itself. It will be a financial crisis unlike any we have ever seen, and it's no longer a question of if, it's a question of when. The timeline is accelerating. What used to be a slow, multi-decade process is now happening in a matter of years. China's selling of US debt is not just a financial transaction, it's a geopolitical statement. It's a declaration of independence from the dollar system, and it's a warning. The world is de-dollarizing, and the US is not prepared for what comes next. The exorbitant privilege is over. The signs of weakness are everywhere. The crisis of confidence is here. And stage 4 is coming. Let's be clear about what this means for you. This isn't some abstract geopolitical game. This is about the money in your pocket, the food on your table, the roof over your head. When the dollar collapses, the price of everything you buy will go up. Not by a little, by a lot. The gas in your car, the groceries in your fridge, the clothes on your back. Everything that is imported or has imported components will become unimaginably expensive. Your savings, your 401k, your pension, all of it will be devalued. The purchasing power of your life's work will be wiped out. The stock market, which has been propped up by a flood of cheap money for the last decade, will crash. And it won't be a quick crash. It will be a long, grinding bear market that will last for years. Your job will be at risk. Your business will be at risk. Your entire way of life will be at risk. This is not hyperbole. This is history. Every reserve currency in history has eventually collapsed. The Roman denarius, the Dutch guilder, the British pound. And the US dollar will be no different. The only question is how much time we have left. And the answer is not much. The actions of China and other countries are a clear signal that the end is near. They are not waiting for the ship to sink. They are getting into the lifeboats, and they are leaving us behind to go down with the ship. The American empire is crumbling, and the American people are about to pay the price. The world is changing. The rules are changing. And if you don't change with them, you will be left behind. The time to prepare is now. Because when stage 4 arrives, it will be too late. Be too late. You're too much right. Let's unpack this further, because this isn't just a financial story. It's a story about power, trust, and the shifting sands of global influence. The dollar's position as the world's reserve currency was never a given. It was the result of a specific set of historical circumstances, and those circumstances are now unwinding. Think back to the end of World War II. Europe was in ruins. The British Empire was bankrupt. The United States was the only major industrial power left standing. It had most of the world's gold, the strongest economy, and the most powerful military. At the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944, the US made the world an offer it couldn't refuse. Peg your currencies to the dollar, and we will peg the dollar to gold at a fixed rate of $35 an ounce. This created a stable and predictable international financial system with the dollar at its center. This was the birth of the exorbitant privilege. It meant that the US could print the world's money, and the world had to accept it. For a while, this system worked. It fueled the post-war economic boom and created a period of unprecedented prosperity. But the US couldn't resist the temptation to abuse its privilege. The Vietnam War and the expansion of the welfare state in the 1960s led to massive government spending, which was financed by printing more and more dollars. The world began to realize that the US didn't have enough gold to back all the dollars it was printing. In 1971, President Nixon shocked the world by unilaterally abandoning the gold standard. The dollar was no longer backed by gold. It was backed by nothing but the full faith and credit of the United States government. This should have been the end of the dollar's reign, but a funny thing happened. The world had nowhere else to go. The dollar was so deeply embedded in the global financial system that there was no viable alternative. And the US made a brilliant strategic move. They struck a deal with Saudi Arabia to price oil exclusively in dollars. This was the birth of the petrodollar system. Since every country needs to buy oil, every country needs to have dollars. This created a permanent artificial demand for the US currency and allowed the exorbitant privilege to continue even without the backing of gold. But the signs of weakness were accumulating. The hollowing out of the manufacturing base, the rise of China as a global economic power, the series of asset bubbles and financial crises. All of it was eroding the foundation of the dollar system. The 2008 financial crisis was a major turning point. The US prime, the supposed steward of the global financial system, was the source of the crisis. And its solution was to print trillions of dollars to bail out its own reckless banks. The world watched in horror. The trust was broken. And then came the final straw, the weaponization of the dollar. The freezing of Russia's central bank assets was a line that had never been crossed before. It demonstrated that the US was willing to use its control of the financial system as a tool of raw geopolitical power. It showed that the principles of private property and sovereign immunity were no longer sacred. Your dollars were only safe as long as you remained in the good graces of the United States government. For countries like China, this was an existential threat. China is the world's largest trading nation. It holds trillions of dollars in reserves. The idea that those reserves could be seized at a moment's notice was terrifying, and so they made a strategic decision. They would de-dollarize. They would reduce their dependence on the US dollar and build a new financial system that was not subject to the whims of American foreign policy. This is the context for everything that is happening now. The selling of US Treasuries, the accumulation of gold, the creation of alternative payment systems. This is not a random series of events. This is a calculated long-term strategy to end the dollar's exorbitant privilege. And it is working. So what does stage 4, the collapse, actually look like? It won't be a single event. It will be a process. A slow grinding decline that suddenly accelerates into a panic. It will start with a failed Treasury auction where the US government is unable to sell enough bonds to finance its deficit. Interest rates will spike. The stock market will crash. And the Fed will be forced to step in and print trillions of dollars to buy the unsold bonds. This is called debt monetization. It's the government printing money to pay its own bills. It's the final desperate act of a dying empire. And it will lead to hyperinflation. The value of the dollar will collapse. The price of everything will skyrocket. Your life savings will be wiped out. The social fabric will unravel. There will be riots, shortages, and political chaos. It will be a crisis on a scale that we have not seen in our lifetimes. And it is no longer a distant possibility. It is a mathematical certainty. The only question is how you will protect yourself and your family from the coming storm. Because the storm is coming, and it will not spare anyone. Anyone. To write. Let's make this even more concrete. What does this mean for your daily life? It means the era of cheap consumer goods is over. For the last 30 years, the US-China trade relationship has acted as a massive deflationary force on the global economy. China's low labor costs, combined with a strong dollar, meant that American consumers had access to a seemingly endless supply of cheap electronics, clothes, toys, and household goods. This is what allowed Walmart to become the biggest retailer in the world. This is what allowed the American middle class to maintain its standard of living even as wages stagnated. But that era is ending. As China's currency strengthens and as the dollar weakens, the price of everything imported from China will go up. That iPhone in your pocket, it will cost more. Those sneakers on your feet, they will cost more. The furniture in your house, it will cost more. This isn't a small one-time price increase. It's a permanent structural shift in the cost of living. It's a tax on the American consumer, levied not by the government, but by the changing dynamics of the global economy. And it's not just about the price of goods, it's about the price of money. For decades, China's willingness to buy US debt has kept interest rates artificially low. This has made it cheaper for Americans to borrow money to buy homes, cars, and to start businesses. It has also fueled a massive bubble in the stock market, as low interest rates have forced investors to take on more and more risk in search of a decent return. When China stops buying our debt and starts selling it, all of that will reverse. Interest rates will rise, mortgages will become more expensive, car loans will become more expensive, business loans will become more expensive. The cost of borrowing for the US government will skyrocket, forcing it to either raise taxes, cut spending, or print even more money to pay the interest on its debt. The stock market, which has become addicted to cheap money, will go into withdrawal. The bubble will pop. and the wealth that millions of Americans have stored in their 401ks and IRAs will evaporate. This is the inevitable consequence of the end of the dollar's exorbitant privilege. It's a painful but necessary adjustment. It's the price we have to pay for decades of living beyond our means, for decades of consuming more than we produce, for decades of believing that we could borrow our way to prosperity. The world is calling our bluff, and we have no cards left to play. The de-dollarization train has left the station, and it is picking up speed. The only question now is whether we will be the passengers or the tracks. The choice is ours, but we are running out of time. The world is not going to wait for us to get our house in order. They are moving on, and they are creating a new world order, a world order that is not centered on the United States, a world order where the dollar is just one currency among many, a world order where America is just one country among many. This is the future, and it is coming faster than you think.